Hey everyone. Good to be with you again. Lauren Blauvelt, I use she, her pronouns. I'm the executive director of Planned Parenthood Advocates of Ohio. And I'm joined with the amazing Danielle and Diamond, who are going to introduce themselves.
Good morning, everyone. I am Danielle Firsich. My pronouns are she, her, and I am the Director of Public Policy for Planned Parenthood Advocates of Ohio.
Hi, everyone. My name is Diamond Crumby. I use she, her pronouns, and I serve as the Director of Communications for Planned Parenthood Advocates of Ohio. And I'm so glad that we're here talking about a very timely topic. You want to kick us off, Lauren?
Yeah, I mean, we're starting a new legislative year. I mean, here in Ohio, Danielle will tell you, we're always in a legislative cycle, but we have some major attacks facing the Ohio Reproductive Freedom Amendment. So it's, I think, important to remember, how did we get here? And, here in Ohio, we saw the fall of Roe coming for many years before it happened, because really the last 15 years, we were seeing attack after attack on our right to access abortion, our ability to access abortion, and really how that impacted reproductive health care across the board. We actually saw 31 abortion bans and restrictions passed that impacted half of our abortion clinics had to close, and it became incredibly hard to get an appointment. There was a 24-hour waiting period, which usually meant that you had many days in between your appointments. It made it harder to provide care and receive it. And all of that culminated when the Supreme Court made the Dobbs decision, and Roe, which was our kind of last protection, fell away. What we understood at the time was really Roe was the floor, not the ceiling, as far as the protections we needed for reproductive health care. But we really felt the loss of Roe immediately in Ohio because we had 11 weeks where we didn't have access to abortion. If you had needed an appointment after fetal tones were detected, which happens before most people even know they're pregnant, then you weren't able to get an abortion here in Ohio. But luckily, Planned Parenthood Advocates of Ohio and our amazing partners like the ACLU, Abortion Forward, Ohio Women's Alliance, New Voices for Reproductive Justice, Preterm, Abortion Fund of Ohio, URGE, we came together as a large movement for reproductive freedom, all organizations who'd been working here in Ohio for many years, whether that's as leading advocates in policy or providing healthcare specifically, raising funds to pay for abortion. All of us came together with expertise, also providing abortion, but also running elections. Like we have Planned Parenthood Votes. Ohio is our super PAC, as we know. So we came together as a coalition. We worked with a lot of organizations that joined with us, like a doctors group and many other local grassroots organizations who jumped in to ensure that we could win the Ohio Reproductive Freedom Amendment. And I know you both were leaders on the team that came together. I led the executive committee as the chair, but we had so many important people jumping in to lead to win this effort. So I'll pass it off to you all to add and then kind of finish it off.
The issue one period was really fascinating because we're coming out of the fall of Roe v. Wade. We saw a slew of states immediately put something onto the ballot that year in 2022 to attempt to protect abortion access in their states. And we saw some really interesting things happening. So we know that it was a decades-long project, right, to take away the rights afforded to us by Roe v. Wade. And therefore, it's going to be a decades-long process reinstituting all of these protections, especially if you have to go state by state, which is quite a process. But we saw in red state after red state, voters voting for abortion access in states like Kentucky, Montana, Missouri. And then Ohio was the only state that had an abortion-related amendment on the ballot in 2023. So it was kind of like the eyes of the nation were all on Ohio. And seeing if this was going to be a long-term form of mobilization for voters who wanted bodily autonomy. And we were up against effectively the entire infrastructure of the state, the entire political infrastructure of the state. Our governor was doing ads against our abortion amendment. We were up against the Secretary of State, the Attorney General, and they have since then, along with the legislature, made very clear that they don't want to uphold the will of the voters with that 57% majority. And we've seen a lot of attempts to either roll back aspects of issue 1 to reinstate prior abortion restrictions, and or to give the state a lot more power, especially characters like the Attorney General, to be able to kind of punt these cases from the lower courts up to the Ohio Supreme Court. Because a very decisive piece of issue 1 is that we now have a 6-1 conservative majority on the Ohio Supreme Court, staunchly anti-abortion. The Attorney General is well aware of that, and of course wants to kind of leapfrog the lower courts that are protecting abortion access and get these cases in front of the Ohio Supreme Court in the hopes that it would be more amenable to his arguments against issue 1. So we're up against an enormous infrastructure. We are now heading into what is sure to be an absolutely wild 2026 midterms. So once again, Ohio has no chill in the political world, and we are racing ahead trying to protect abortion access, Medicaid, and a number of other things that help protect our most vulnerable.
I agree with you 100%, Danielle, that 2023 was very fascinating. Something that I wanted to really clue in on, especially in my role in communications, was we had to fight up against a lot of disinformation. Not only disinformation from your, everyday right-wing anti-abortion activists, but we also had to fight misinformation from our government, including having to fight against an August special election that would have raised the threshold for passing citizen-led ballot initiatives. Luckily, Ohioans saw through the deception, and they showed up to vote against that, I think, in the same degree that they showed up for reproductive freedom, that 57% of Ohioans not only voted to protect their right at the ballot box through, defeating the August special election, but also their right to bodily autonomy by voting for reproductive freedom. But when it comes to communication, specifically around disinformation, like Danielle said, our governor made attack ads against the ballot initiative. When the true work of the ballot initiative was to undo, like Lauren said, the 15 years of anti-abortion policy versus a trap law or a targeted restriction against an abortion provider type of law, against different types of requirements only placed on abortion providers, as well as the health centers and facilities. So it was a very interesting year, and we're still trying to actualize the full power of the amendment.
One of the responsibilities I feel after the 2023 amendment is talking about how difficult actually running a ballot initiative and putting together a ballot initiative was, and the responsibility that we felt as leaders and as organizations, not just after Roe fell, but in the years building up to the loss of Roe. We were losing, we were losing a lot. We were losing at every one of those 31 abortion bans that was passed. We fought through every part of the legislative process. So we had testimony, we had experts, we had lobbyists, we had Republicans who used to be in office secretly lobbying and behind the scenes. I mean, every lever of power that we could pull, we did to try to stop a 6-week ban from passing, defunding of Planned Parenthood from passing. But what we found is that our opposition was too committed to banning abortion. This was their top issue. Could there have been many other issues serving Ohioans? Absolutely. But cutting away reproductive health care access from Ohioans was their top priority. And so our top priority had to be building our electoral, our legislative, our advocacy strength as organizations. So we had strong organizations coming into this coalition, and we had a strong plan that we were able to increase, our fundraising, get investment from people in Ohio and outside of Ohio. We talked about the amazing grassroots effort that came together, and that came together in writing the language and getting it passed by the Attorney General, collecting over 700,000 signatures to get it on the ballot. Diamond, as you said, because we were up against the government. So we had a second election where they tried to overturn our ballot initiative process. And instead of it being majority 50+1 to win, they wanted it to be 60%. And we were able to fight that back in August and then win ultimately 57% of the vote in November. So and we were actually the first red state to vote yes. All the states that came before us were voting no against bans, whereas we were actually voting yes to change the Constitution. So we have a responsibility now to the voters and to all of our patients to ensure that the rights that they came out and voted for are actualized here in Ohio. And that is, in some ways, maybe just as hard, because, while the Constitution now protects reproductive freedom, including abortion, it doesn't change automatically the 31 abortion bans and restrictions. So we're facing the bans that were currently in place, and we are having to litigate to get rid of them in the Supreme Court that you just talked about, Danielle. So I don't know if you want to jump in to the litigation that we're working towards. I know we can talk about all the amazing, positive impacts that we've had, but also, what the fight really looks like this year on the ground for our supporters.
We have won several cases. There are still so many to go. And like Lauren said, I think a lot of people didn't understand that issue 1 wasn't the end all be all, that it didn't immediately nullify all these prior restrictions. Litigation is really costly. It is really timely. We're up against a Supreme Court that is staunchly anti-abortion and very politicized at this point. We now have very political judicial elections, which tends to lead to, surprise, surprise, corruption in the courts and or them upholding various laws that support big business, government over citizenry and the average Ohioan. So we're up against a really big system. And we've had some really important wins, including things like the 24-hour waiting period. And when I talk about this, I think that it seems like a small thing on its face to some people, right? Like, oh, what's the big deal? A 24-hour waiting period. Well, the fact is, most of the American South and Midwest has gone dark on abortion rights. We are the first state that many people can even access right now when it comes to abortion in the South and Midwest. So there are over 24 states that have folks who are traveling to the state of Ohio to attempt to get access to abortion care. Now imagine that you are traveling here and you have to pay for childcare. You have to pay for transportation. You have to get time off your job. You get here, you have one appointment. You have a 24-hour waiting period that doesn't always translate into just 24 hours. That could be days to a week or two later that your second appointment happens. You're now in another state, perhaps with your children, not working, having to pay for that lodging, having to pay for that transportation, just so that you can get the medical care that you deserve and that you know that you need. And so the 24-hour waiting period actually translated into a massive barrier, especially for folks that are traveling in any capacity, whether from out of state or even from rural Ohio to areas where we're able to have access. Because we're seeing right now that there is quite an attack happening on rural healthcare, rural infrastructure. So a lot of folks, even in our own state, have difficulty planning ahead and being able to travel to places for medical care. So the 24-hour waiting period being knocked down was a really big deal and allowed us to immediately jump in and expand services and have more timely services for people that deserve them. The 6-week ban sounds like it is obviously unconstitutional, right? Issue 1 passes. How in the world is a 6-week ban constitutional? This actually took a lot longer to decide than I think many of us were really expecting and or comfortable with, which is really interesting because it tells you that, yeah, issue 1 passed. You would assume that immediately any magistrate or judge attached to that case would say, oh, obviously now the 6-week ban is unconstitutional. But that is not what happened. We went through months and months of waiting for that decision to come out and to be formalized. And we also have now every one of these decisions is being appealed by our Attorney General up to the Ohio Supreme Court. So we still don't have final decisions per se in a lot of these cases. And we're seeing a lot of attacks on the lower courts from our state trifecta in government, because the lower courts are the ones that have really been standing strong and standing for issue one. It looks very different as it moves up the process through appeals in the Ohio Supreme Court. So even the wins that we've had aren't set in stone, because at the end of the day, the Ohio Supreme Court gets the final verdict, and they are the final interpreter of what issue one really looks like in the state.
I definitely want to double highlight like the length of time it takes to litigate. Like, remember, we passed issue one November 7th, 2023. And the law went into effect a month later, December 7th, 2023. I recall at that time that the 6-week ban was under consideration, but due to a change of law, it was kicked back to the lower court. Same thing goes with the 24-hour waiting period. Like, that did not go away till 9 months after issue one passed. Another bill that we were able to, again, have a permanent injunction on, which is basically the government can no longer enforce the law, is the advanced practice clinician ban. That ban had stopped nurse practitioners, certified nurse midwives, physician assistants, very qualified people from providing medication abortion. And this same law also is the reason why medication abortion is not allowed for people that are more than 10 weeks pregnant, even though it can be safely used up to 12 weeks of pregnancy. So with that law being defeated, we have opened up care. So people that are traveling to Ohio, like Danielle was saying, they now have the option to choose medication abortion if that's what they want. I just think that when we allow medical science to be politicized, patients hurt at the end.
The good news is we're making a lot of really good progress. The 6-week ban, while still moving through, is enjoined. So is the 24-hour waiting period. So is a ban on telemedicine, which, opens up more access. And as you were saying, Diamond, we recently got the decision that nurse practitioners can provide medication abortion. So in our Planned Parenthood Ohio access, that expanded access to medication abortion in Athens. We know it's going to expand to Mansfield. So, more rural communities outside of the big cities are going to be able to, access abortion immediately, which is so important. But we have to remember that nothing that we do is happening in a vacuum. So, we are moving forward. We're getting good decisions by the lower courts, like you said, Danielle, and yet we still have a very well-funded and active opposition that still has the full weight of the state government behind them. And we see that in this continued case for the 6-week ban, which is, unconstitutional. It's the total abortion ban, essentially, because you can't get an abortion under the circumstances. But the state's still suing to keep it from being permanently enjoined.
The 6-week ban is currently not being enforced. However, it is getting a hearing September 16th at the First District Court of Appeals, which is in Hamilton County. I think it's worth noting that abortion is still legal for 21 weeks and 6 days, but we still have to go through the entire process. Like Danielle was saying, litigation is very slow. But on top of that, the full weight of the state government is using their power to try to undo the hard grassroots work that we have done to protect bodily autonomy. Lauren, did you want to speak more to that?
Yeah, it's incredibly important to remember that even though we've had a lot of success, the 6-week ban is enjoined, the 24-hour waiting period is enjoined. We were able to pause a ban on telemedicine. And like you said, recently we've been able to open up access by allowing nurse practitioners to be able to provide medication abortion. But we still have a well-funded opposition that is fighting us at every turn. And they, like you said, have the full weight of the state government that they're using to continue to attack reproductive health care and to ignore the 57% of Ohioans who came out and voted for reproductive freedom, including and especially access to abortion. So on September 16th, we're asking our supporters to show up and fight back with us because this hearing shouldn't be happening. While we, have a lot of faith in the appellate court judges, that they understand what's going on and, that this is already decided in the Constitution, the fact that the state government is using resources and time to continue to fight on a decision that was so clearly decided by the voters with their civic right to a ballot initiative here in Ohio, that tells you that they're not listening to the voters, that they are going to continue to attack reproductive freedom and access to abortion no matter what. And that means we have a responsibility as advocates to not take our eyes off of our right to reproductive freedom and abortion, because our opposition is going to continue to attack it like they attacked it before we won the ballot initiative. When Roe became the law of the land in 1973, progressives, supporters believed that Supreme Court decision was the final say on if abortion was going to be legal in the United States. And so even though there was a growing opposition movement, we largely didn't talk about abortion. We wanted it to be a private issue. We didn't want to make it a political issue. The activists who spent their time really advocating for abortion and trying to make sure that people had access were kind of considered extreme, or, they weren't the center of the party. They were ignored. And, we see the fallout of that because by the time we were able, I think like our generation were at the table and advocating for abortion access and access to Planned Parenthood and all of our other reproductive and abortion providing partners. It was really too late as far as the power that the Republican Party had amassed to ban abortion in the United States. Just as a small historical aside, the Republican Party has not always been anti-abortion. That was a shift that happened over time, but it is a party stance that they have that, we're healthcare shouldn't be political, but it has been made political. So that wasn't Planned Parenthood's doing. We're just calling a spade and saying that it is the Republican Party, especially here in Ohio, that is actively trying to ban abortion and consistently ignoring the will of the majority of Ohioans, just like the Republican Party is ignoring the will of the majority of Americans when it comes to access to abortion. And this hearing is just a really clear proof point that they're not going to stop. But I know that there's a lot more proof points here in Ohio. Danielle, can you talk about like the legislative attacks that are continuing to happen? Not past attacks, but like here in the year of 2025.
The Republicans, per usual, are those metaphorical raptors testing the fences, right? They're trying to find ways that they can work around or slip through the cracks of issue one in order to pass anti-abortion or anti-repro legislation. And mind you, to touch back on something Lauren said, they're betraying their own voters in a massive way. You have to understand that in a state like Ohio, issue one could never have passed without a lot of Republican identified and or independent voters voting for it. We flipped 18 Trump 2020 counties. That's a really big deal. We saw a third of people who believe life begins at conception vote for abortion access, a third of evangelicals, over half of all weekly church-going people voted for issue one. So this all touches on the fact that for decades, we have seen an onslaught of attacks that includes a lot of demonization, a lot of disinformation. And that's why it became such a strong pillar of this party. And now they're actually seeing that when people see what that looks like in practice, what abortion bans actually look like, people don't want it. Because we see our maternal and infant mortality rates skyrocket. We see all of these unnecessary, long-term, horrendous impacts on people's well-being, on their health, on their financial status, on their social status. It is a massive deal when you are stripped of your bodily autonomy and are unable to make decisions for yourself and your family. And people do not like that. People don't like government overreach for the most part, and they certainly don't when it comes to healthcare. So it's really interesting that there seems to be a doubling down on this anti-abortion rhetoric and these anti-abortion attacks when it is so clearly unpopular on a widespread scale, regardless of political affiliation. So we actually have quite a few bills on the books right now in the Ohio legislature attacking abortion access. So we have HB 347. This would reestablish the 24-hour waiting period. Again, this is an absolute waste of time. This bill, we've already seen that we won litigation getting rid of that 24-hour waiting period. And we also have to note that the legislators that are introducing these bills are not medical professionals and have no expertise in this area. So that's a really problematic part of a lot of legislation, that they will argue against things that are pillars in the medical community, and that are this bill is saying that it's part of informed consent, that you have to have a 24-hour waiting period. Well, guess what? A 24-hour waiting period doesn't exist for anything else. It only exists for abortion. And that tells you that this is absolutely political. There is no medical necessity for you to have this in place. So 347, HB 347, introduced by Josh Williams, would reestablish that 24-hour waiting period, which we've already won a court case for. So we'll see what happens here. The legislature is out on recess until next month, likely. So I'm sure they will be coming back with a lot of big plans for the rest of the year leading up to the midterms, but we shall see.
Josh Williams is the state rep for one of my the adjacent district that I live in, and he's just putting out these bills because he's trying to rack up brownie points ahead of the midterm, where he is hoping to unseat Representative Marcy Kaptur. We'll see how that goes. But again, one thing I think a lot of people forget is that over 80% of Americans believe abortion should be legal. And that includes 58% of conservatives. So I want to double score what Danielle said, that abortion rights, bodily autonomy is not a partisan issue. It's a people issue. And people want to exercise their ideology on others. That's why we have to keep rising up for repro. So hopefully you all are able to join the activation on September 16th. But I definitely wanted to underscore, some of the political machining that people are doing to boost up their name rather than actually bring tangible changes to their districts, like making sure that schools are actually properly funded. That should be, a topic that we look for our state legislature to solve, not for them to take away healthcare.
This is really important to point out that, these are elected officials that are supposed to be beholden to their communities and their constituents. And we see a lot of them, frankly, wasting our time and theirs introducing things that are effectively messaging bills that aren't going to go anywhere and/or would lead to hearings that don't lead to it coming onto the House or the Senate floor for passage, but they are just kind of throwing red meat to what they believe to be their base. And the funny part of this is that none of this is popular with their base either. And if you want to talk about one of the most unpopular things in this country when it comes to statewide politics, let's talk fetal personhood, because we have several fetal personhood related bills in the legislature right now. One of the most politically unpopular concepts out there. Fetal personhood stems from the idea that upon the moment of conception, there should be like civil and criminal rights afforded to an embryo from the moment of conception. Not to mention the fact that the moment of conception is a concept that makes no logical medical sense in the first place. How in the world does anyone know the moment that conception occurs? We already know most people don't even know they're pregnant at 6 weeks when a lot of these abortion bans are often put into place. So how do you even establish this, right, in the timeline of what's happening with your body? And it also is really problematic because obviously, if fetal personhood exists, abortion is out the window. Obviously, all abortion is illegal if fetal personhood exists. That also means that people will not have access to IVF. We would likely see IVF banned. We would likely see long-term birth control like IUDs likely banned as well. So this is not only an attack on abortion, this is an attack on fertility, which a lot of people struggle with. IVF is incredibly popular. So just as much as fetal personhood is insanely unpopular across the political spectrum, IVF is very popular across the entire political spectrum. We know a lot of people struggle with fertility in this country, and it's already really difficult to access different forms of fertility support, especially because it's economically so difficult for people that are economically disadvantaged. We have HB 370. So this is basically the absolute antithesis of the Reproductive Freedom Amendment. It would establish fetal personhood. It would be a total abortion ban, again, with no exceptions for cases of rape or incest and or the life of the pregnant person. So HB 370 is basically, a bastardization of issue 1. It is the absolute antithesis. It's really dangerous. I don't know how much support or traction these bills are going to have because, again, fetal personhood is not popular. We've already seen fetal personhood bills introduced in legislatures prior, in sessions prior, that went absolutely nowhere. We just had one in 2022 that was defeated. And I think that, frankly, it's really insulting to voters when these things are introduced over and over when they clearly have no support and or no medical basis or factual basis. Because we also saw in that same cycle that we saw a previous fetal personhood bill, we saw a bill that said that you would have to re-implant an ectopic pregnancy into the uterus if someone had an ectopic pregnancy. That is a physical medical impossibility. There's absolutely no way for that to happen. Ectopic pregnancies are 100% fatal to the pregnant person and or the fetus. And you have these kinds of things being written into bills by people that just have a flagrant lack of care for the health care of their constituents and the well-being of their constituents, because this isn't real. Like, we're fighting so many battles on these fronts that are absolutely arbitrary and made up by political actors who only care about themselves and personal advancement. So that's what makes this so exhausting.
I agree with that 100%. And, just bringing in like an intersectional perspective, the flip side of these laws is that it leads to criminalization, and it can even lead to experimentation. When we hear about fetal personhood, people automatically think, oh, well, yeah, life begins at conception, but they don't understand the repercussions that come with that. So with bills like this in place, that allowed for women like Brittany Watts, who is currently suing the nurses and the police out of Warren County for her being arrested after suffering a miscarriage, after being sent home twice from the hospital, being denied care, waiting hours on end, and being accused that she was the reason for her miscarriage. And then we have, Georgia, that actually passed a fetal personhood bill back in, was it 2019, I think? Essentially, that is the reason why Adriana Smith, you all have probably heard, Black woman that was brain dead and was kept artificially alive so the fetus could grow. The fetus was delivered over the summer, but the baby now has certain complications that the family is currently working through. But the family has been very vocal in saying that they wanted their daughter to be at peace, not to be experimented on. And like you said, Danielle, it is the Raptors testing the fence when it comes to these types of laws, because they want to see how far it can go. Can we criminalize people? Well, yeah. I definitely feel as though Black women are the first people to be criminalized for negative pregnancy outcomes. So I definitely want to, double score that some of these laws, they are void of humanity.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And we should be working towards the protections for real human rights in healthcare and transparency and education and making sure that, racism is acknowledged as a public health crisis and is accurately educated in medical schools and fought against like stigma and misconception. And, it's makes for even more dangerous times that we have, unfortunately lost the support and, frankly, the ability to trust in our largest healthcare institutions that are currently being run by the Trump administration and by Robert Kennedy Jr., that HHS and the CDC and Medicaid, these are institutions that we expect a lot from that we no longer can. And it is very much connected to, the way that we provide public health and healthcare, here in our states. But it, really connects to the politicalization of our healthcare. We've had terrible histories through our country in healthcare that we were still trying to grapple with and face and acknowledge and make sure that, we don't have disparities in healthcare and in health outcomes for Black women. There shouldn't be higher rates of infant or maternal mortality for Black women, higher than white women. That should not be the case. And being able to acknowledge that shouldn't be punished. What we have to acknowledge is that it's on purpose. It's not that they don't know that the laws that they're passing or the bans that they're passing or the misinformation that they're putting out, whether we're talking about, what's coming out of HHS right now or what's been coming out of the Ohio Republican Party through the legislature for many years now, is they are okay with the negative outcomes that come into communities based on the laws that they pass. They are okay that when a Planned Parenthood closes and those patients aren't able to find healthcare from other providers because other providers either aren't there to take Medicaid patients or aren't there to take more patients for reproductive health care, or they just already have, they're full, or they've also closed for different reasons. There's a lot of disparities in healthcare that are just getting worse at a time where we were really looking for leadership and investment, from our government. And instead we get bans and misinformation. And I think we have to be extra vigilant when watching the laws that are being introduced, because sometimes something is unpopular when it's introduced, like fetal personhood, like Danielle was saying. But the 6-week ban was really unpopular when it was first introduced around 2011. But it was ultimately signed into law by Governor DeWine in 2019 because our opposition was actually supportive of it, and they just kept working until they had enough Republican lawmakers to sign it to make it law. So sometimes they say they don't support something, but they really are just waiting for just lawmakers, not voters. The voters don't really change their minds. It's about getting the most extreme lawmakers in office. They just need to get enough votes in their state house to pass these really extreme bills. And then we're forced to litigate them, and we're forced to deal with the consequences if they get passed. And that's ultimately what happened with the 6-week ban. So I do take it seriously when they put legislation out that would make fetal personhood a reality, which basically makes any decision that the pregnant person does with their body illegal. Essentially puts you in a limbo position where you don't have control over your medical decisions that impact the pregnancy. Just like you described with the horrible case in Georgia. I do take it seriously. And that's why, I know all of our activists aren't going to be able to show up necessarily in person on September 16th. I hope if you are in the Southwest Ohio region that you are able to show up and support. But join Planned Parenthood Advocates of Ohio as a volunteer. We have virtual opportunities if you're not in one of the cities where we have organizers. And if you're in Columbus or Cleveland, we have regular events that you can participate, because this is the time for us to be talking to each other, to show up to events, to get to know who our lawmakers are, so they know who we are. And so they know that they're being watched, that they know that they're constituents and their voters are paying attention and are going to continue to pay attention throughout all of this nonsense, because a lot is coming at us right now. And while we aren't able to change everything right now, they have a lot of power. There's no getting around that. We are in a weaker position, especially in a state like Ohio, where all of the statewide lawmakers are Republicans. The state house has the majority with the president and the Senate and the House of Representatives and the Supreme Court. That's a lot of power that they hold. But they don't control what we do as individuals. They don't control how we vote, and they don't control what we say to each other and online. And so it's on us to participate, to find out what the real information is, to share it with our friends and families, and to show up for our communities and to show up against these people who are trying to make us sicker, to trying to make our communities weaker, and are trying to rip away the human rights that a lot of our us individually and a lot of our ancestors and family members and community members fought for up until this point. Like they're dragging us backwards, and we can't afford to let them.
And the point of all of this, you have to remember, is to overwhelm, exhaust, and confuse you. That is the point of the multi-pronged attacks. This is, again, we talked about how we may not see a federal abortion ban be put on the books, but we are going to see a death by 1,000 cuts approach. And again, it goes back to, that metaphor of the frog in the boiling water, right? Like a frog, if you put it in boiling water, it'll jump out right away. But if you slowly heat it over time, it doesn't notice that it's boiling until it's way too late. And that's effectively what we're seeing right now. We're seeing the erosion of all of these institutions. We're seeing attacks on so many fronts that it's meant to make you feel helpless and disparage you and make you feel that there's absolutely nothing that you can do in the face of all these attacks. And we know that our state legislature is taking its marching orders from the federal government, from federal Congress. And it's really important for people to show up, because guess what? It is very, very clear and very apparent that they are scared of their own constituents. Like, you have a lot more power than you think. Sometimes these people are literally scared to face their own voters. We have legacy people in Congress that have been in Congress for decades that have never even had a town hall during the entirety of their careers. We have our own legislators and congressional members that are avoiding their constituents at all costs right now because they are getting absolutely destroyed when they're faced by their own constituents. So we need to make it impossible for them to exist in this system and for them to continue these attacks without coming up against the full force of their own voters and their own constituents at every single turn. Because if you give them any leeway at all, they will steamroll you. So we have to be a united force throughout all of this.
And we won't have reproductive freedom if we don't have fair maps, if we don't have fair representation, because we absolutely have abortion bans, restrictions, and a continued attack on the Ohio Reproductive Freedom Amendment because our legislature is skewed towards Republicans. And so we're going to talk again more deeply about redistricting. Right now, we are fighting for the Ohio Reproductive Freedom Amendment. This fight is going to continue. Please join us at Planned Parenthood, advocatesofOhio.org. Become a volunteer. Follow us on our social media at PPAO Ohio. This fight continues, and we need you.
Thanks for listening. It's going to take all of us for autonomy to rise. So like, subscribe, and share. Support our work by donating to Planned Parenthood Advocates of Ohio. Visit us at plannedparenthoodaction.org. And don't forget to text CARE, C-A-R-E, to 22422 to protect Medicaid and Planned Parenthood for all.